Hello, everyone, and welcome into Coach Craig's Sports. This is the XFL DFS live stream video for week number 2, talking about some picks. I do have my stats up from last week as well, since I did get the snap shares for last week from Pro Football Focus. So I did add them to the sheet. Want to go over them just a little bit real quickly before we get into everything else today. But mainly for today, we're going to be talking about pretty much who I would be considered playing this week overall. Kind of whether I would play guys in GPPs, whether I played them in cash, whether kind of like a dart throw play overall. But if anybody does have any specific questions as we get moving along, whether you're listening live or on replay, feel free to either leave it in the chat if you're listening live or leave it down in the comments on replay. Obviously, it's a little bit of a different week since we do have the lone Thursday game tonight with Seattle and St. Louis. So that's definitely going to be a point of contention there. But would talk a little bit more about injuries this week. There's not too much out there looming that we're really paying attention to, but we'll get into that a little bit as we get going. In terms of the stats from last week, the snaps shares that we did see. So just going as quickly as I can through this. Renegades, obviously, as we mentioned the other day, Kyle Slaughter played all the snaps at quarterback. And at running back, mainly Davion Smith, he got just under 75% of the snaps there. And then Keith Ford was at 27%. Adrian Killens was right around 5%, but he was mainly lined up as kind of the slot wide receiver, got a couple end arounds. In terms of wide receivers, Tyler Vaughn's had the biggest share at wide receiver, almost 80%. Jordan Smallwood and Brandon Arcanato, both around 44%. Luan Winningham, right under 40%. And then we did see Sean Modester just at 9% of snaps last week. So not a lot there overall. We did get news that Rennell Hall was going on the reserve list. And then they did sign, I believe, Caleb Van Esch. Going to have to dig a little bit more into him at this point in time, but assume that he'll be inactive this week either way. So not really a point of contention, and obviously he's not on the DraftKings roster. Sal Cannell played 80% of snaps. We saw about 19% from Alex Ellis, one of the reserve tight ends. Sean Byer was at 46% and Nate Becker at 25%. So they rotated kind of those backup tight ends in there as well. Cannell pretty much operated as a wide receiver last week overall. So you could pretty much say the two starting wide receivers for this team at this point in time, Tyler Vaughn's and Sal Cannella. And then we saw a good amount of Jordan Smallwood and not a Brandon Arcanato. We'll see if anything else changes throughout that without the, like in week 2, excuse me. Kind of hard to say that for whatever reason. And then we got down to just DC's the next one up that I do have. Jordan Tiamo was about 74% of snaps. Derek King was 26%. Derek King was mainly involved in those run packages, so not too much else to say there. If Jordan Tiamo struggles or starts to struggle at some point in time, I would not be surprised if they pull the plug on him and go to Derek King a little bit more. But, it is a pretty run-heavy offense. We saw Abram Smith is about 70% of snaps last week. Raquel Armstead was 35% of snaps. So there may have been a couple snaps where they were in there together as well. Artavius Pierce did not factor in at all. He played 0 snaps week 1. Armstead was kind of the receiving back, although Abram Smith, I do believe, ran a couple more routes than him, but Abram Smith more of that plotter back either way, though. And then we get down to the wide receiver room, which was kind of the interesting one for DC here overall. So we have Chris Blair about 75% of snaps, so he kind of led the way there. Then we have Josh Hammond at 79%. So those were the two main guys that were out on the field the most. Jaquiz Zard, who everybody was really excited for, only 17.5% of snaps, even though he was listed as the starter. So that is something to note there. Chad Hansen did miss week 1 with an illness. Supposedly was still dealing with an illness in week 2, but he has now been cut. So that is something to note. Do not play Chad Hansen this week. They did pick up Brandon Smith out of Iowa yesterday as well. So he could factor in very much so in the future, but not for this week probably, since he's not on DraftKings and since he'll probably be inactive. Lucky Jackson led the way in terms of targets, played about 65% of snaps. We had Josh Malone at 31.5%, but when he was in there, he was very active and involved. So I would not be surprised if he mixes in just a little bit more in the coming weeks. We have Ethan Wolf, the tight end, was about 58% of snaps. Burley Moore was at 63%, and Burley Moore is dealing with an injury at this point in time. I believe he is questionable for this week. Trey Berry played the minimum amount of snaps at 5%. So maybe if Burley Moore doesn't play, then Ethan Wolf gets a little bit more involved, but mainly a blocking tight end either way, even though he did have 4 targets in week 1. Then we move down to Houston, 88.5% of the snaps for Brandon Silvers, obviously the lead starter there. Cole McDonald got in for 11.5% of snaps or 11.6% of snaps this past week, just mixing in on some run plays and around the goal line and stuff like that. Not anything that we need to be too concerned about at this point in time. In terms of the running back room, Max Borghi was about 46%. Dewan Lee was at 42%. Nick Holley was at 64% essentially, but he was mainly used as a slot wide receiver this past week. So that is something to keep in mind there. Did mix in just a little bit in the running back room, but not too much overall. When we move down to the wide receivers, Dante Burnett and Javante Kirkland both played on the outside, both played 100% of snaps in week one. So assume that's pretty standard once again this week. Travell Harris was the third leading wide receiver, mainly operating out of the slot, just shy of 80%. And he's a guy that I like quite a bit this week overall, but he is dealing with a nagging injury. He missed the first day of practice, was limited yesterday. We'll just have to keep an eye out on him, but he is something that I do like if he does end up playing this week. And then if he doesn't end up playing, probably Cedric Bird takes his place. He played 36% of snaps last week. And then we did see Ben Putnam get in for about 16% of snaps. Aaron Nelson and Davion Davis did not play at all. And then obviously Dustin Smith was inactive for week one. Garrett Owens, the tight end, only got in for about 16% of snaps. So that's something that is noteworthy. We'll see if he trends upward in future weeks, but probably not a guy that you want to play at this point in time. Orlando, Paxton Lynch played about 60%. Quentin Dormady played about 40% of snaps. Nothing too major there. We kind of talked a lot about that already. We'll see if we get any news about who's starting for Orlando this week, but that quarterback situation is a little shaky at this point in time. Jermaine Martin played about 48% of snaps. We saw about 33% from Calvin Taylor. Dedrick Thomas did make it in the backfield a little bit as well, but he's just kind of tiny wide receiver. They let carry the ball like one or two times. In terms of their wide receiver rooms here and their tight ends, we're just going to go tight end first. So Logan Carter was 34%. Ryan Becker was 13% of snaps. Initially, Coley Lattimore was listed as a tight end on the depth chart. I believe that was just a clerical error. Honestly, if we're talking now, he mainly played X wide receiver when he was in the game. He only played 39% of snaps this past week. You know, he had a good target share. He's very effective, but it seems like they pulled him out when Dormady was in the game. So we'll see if his snap rate goes up this week or not. Definitely somebody still worth considering playing at his price tag this week, as long as he is healthy. And we do not have any news on the injury report that says otherwise. Going to these other wide receivers, Charleston Rambo played 100% of the snaps. Obviously, didn't do too much there. You can take some shots this week if you want to. He's still projected to be pretty popular, though. His price tag is a little bit too high for me personally, so I'm not going there myself. Eli Rogers was, just shy of 63%, mainly operating out of the slot. This would probably be my favorite target outside of Lattimore on this team. He's $3,100. Probably going to be pretty popular. Decent little cash game play, probably, if you want to go there, as well as a cheap takedown option. Dedrick Thomas, we saw just about 42% of snaps, and he was a little bit involved in the backfield, a little bit involved kind of at wide receiver as well. Andrew Jamel was at 58%, operated a little bit in the slot, a little bit on the outside as well, kind of mainly benefited when Lattimore was not out there. So if Lattimore's good to go, probably not going to go to Andrew Jamel this week. Stephen Goodry, 42%. He is dealing with a concussion as we speak as well. So there's a chance that he doesn't play in week 2. So just keep an eye out on that. But a guy that I do like and has some potential for future weeks. And then we had Dontrez Bird, just 28%, probably in a guy that we don't want to play at all. Moving down to San Antonio, once again, Jack Cohn played all the snaps. Don't need to talk about too much there. He is injured at this point in time. He's listed as a limited participant in practice with hip injury. So just keep an eye out on that. If he doesn't play, I would have some exposure to Reed Sennett, who would likely start in his place. Personally, I think Sennett is the better, more talented quarterback. Jack Cohn's more that game manager, pretty safe guy. He threw the ball a ton, but, very short. I can't think of the word right now, but just very short yards per attempt, essentially, for him. Kalen Ballage was 52.5%. We saw Jaquez Patrick at 44, we'll just call 44%. And then Hillman got in there for like 3 plays. So we're not really too worried about him. Ballage just kind of lead back at this point in time. He's nothing flashy at this point in time, but the volume that he has is very hard to ignore. Patrick, I think you can take some shots on as well. Both these guys will be pretty involved. Landon Akers went on the reserve list, so we're not going to talk about him, although he did play 60% of snaps in week 1. Fred Brown only played about 29% of snaps, but he did have, the 4 targets and 4 receptions, so he was pretty involved. Maybe he takes the place of Landon Akers. That'll be something to monitor for sure this week. playing out of that slot position could be beneficial for him. He's got a cheap price tag, and he's not drawing as much ownership as some of the other cheap guys at this point in time. Then we have Travis Johnson, who started on the outside, 52.5% for him. And we saw TJ Vasher get 47.5. So they pretty much split on the outside of Jalen Tolliver. Tolliver played 85% of snaps. He was pretty much involved in most routes. So he is still kind of their number one, even though it wasn't the greatest game for him overall. And I don't know if I mentioned this on the stream the other day, but Reese Roberson Jr. was listed as returning a punt according to XFL.com, even though he's listed as inactive, but that may be all he did in week one. So I just kind of left that open at this point in time. Moving down to the tight ends, Ben BC was inactive, Pettigrew didn't play. And then we saw Alize Mack in on 80% of the snaps and Deion Yelder at 46.25. Both those guys could be a little bit more active this week with no Akers. Maybe they use a little bit more two tight end sets. Both those guys are pretty athletic tight ends. They do have some NFL experience as well. So would not be surprised if they go to more two tight end sets, kind of run some play action, some other plays off of that run game, which is probably going to be their bread and butter to start. Moving down to Seattle, we saw Ben DiNucci played 94% of the snaps pretty much the whole game. Steven Montez got in there for just a couple snaps at one point in the game. In terms of the running backs, we saw Brendan Knox in there for about 36% of the time. Morgan Ellison was out there 42% of the time. But in terms of when they were actually running the ball, it was mainly Knox in there. TJ Hammonds mainly operated as a receiver, was in there 10% of the time as well. Josh Gordon played about 72% of snaps. I know it's kind of notable that he did not play really on that last drive. So that is something to note there, but should be pretty involved again once again this week. Kind of the big surprise was Juwan Green, who was listed as a starter, only played about 27% of snaps in week one. So that is something to monitor going forward. He's more of kind of a dart throw at this point in week two, just since we didn't see him too active out there on the field. If you want to throw him in like a couple lineups, if you're going like 150 max, even a 20 max, 50 max, anything like that, you could throw him in a couple lineups, just sprinkle them in there because we want some of these Seattle pass catchers in general, but wasn't a good week one for him. Blake Jackson played 97, almost 97.5% of snaps week one. Obviously was very active. He is technically listed as questionable at this point in time, I believe, with a thumb injury. He's been dealing with that throughout practice. I kind of expect him to play, but we'll just have to see as we get closer to game time, get some of those inactives listed. I'll either try to tweet out the inactives over on Twitter at CoachCraigSport or leave them down in the comments on this video as well. Kevin McKnight, 31% of snaps, was pretty involved in those. We'll see if Blake Jackson's out, if he gets the guy, if he's the one to step up, or whether it's like a Juwan Green. Jacour Pearson, 33% of snaps, was very involved. Obviously, don't really have any concerns about him at this point in time. Jalen Reed obviously didn't play week one. We saw Jordan Vesey at 73% of snaps too as well. So him and Juwan Green, it looks like split kind of the snaps on the outside there, but VC kind of got the lead. Maybe it was due to NFL experience since he's bounced around a lot of practice squads for some years, though. Although Green does have some NFL experience with the Atlanta Falcons practice squad as well. So not sure what's up with that at this point in time. We'll keep an eye on that moving forward. And then Damian Willis, we got about 28% of snaps. Charlie Tempoa, the tight end, really just played 10% of snaps, wasn't too involved overall. So mainly, when we're talking about Seattle, we're still looking at Josh Gordon, we're looking at Blake Jackson, we're looking at Jacour Pearson. If you want to mix in some VC at minimum price tag, you can do that. If you want to take a shot on Juwan Green this week, you can do that. If you're playing in some bigger tournaments, it's kind of GPPs more so. For St. Louis, AJ McCarron obviously played all the snaps. We already talked about that on the other stream earlier this week. Brian Hill and Kareem Walker both played 43% of snaps in week one, but Brian Hill did get banged up. So technically, it looks like Walker's the backup. There was some question marks with Brian Hill if he'd play this week, but he practiced in full yesterday, so I don't really have any concerns for him moving forward. Then Mateo Durant did mix in about 14% of the time, but was a little bit active in the passing game overall. Marcel Aitman played 94% of snaps. He'll be pretty involved once again. Not super excited with him with AJ McCarron, though. Personally, that's my own take on that. Hakeem Butler did really well in limited playing time, but only about 35% of snaps he was actually out there for. George Campbell, only 2%. We're not talking about him. And then Gary Jennings, 6% as well. So those aren't really guys to consider. Stephen Mitchell did miss week one due to injury. So we'll see if he's out there this week or not, but not really interested in him either way. Austin Proel played 80% of the snaps in as kind of that slot wide receiver. So pretty interested in him once again this week. Darius Shepard played 98% of snaps. I believe he ran every route as well in week 1. So he's somebody that we can look at, but I don't like his price tag at this point in time. The tight ends, they all pretty much split. Javani Haskins, 26.5%, Jake Sutherland, about 35%, and Jordan Thomas, about 24.5%. None of them were super involved either way. Then last but not least, we have Vegas, who had Luis Perez out there at quarterback, 100% of snaps in week 1. So that is something to note. But those 2 pick sixes, Rod Whitson talking in his interview saying that can't happen. Luis Perez is probably on a short leash this week since he is still starting, but Brett Hundley is looming in the wings as well. In terms of running back, we saw the most of Rod Smith at 46.5%. John Love at about 19%, DeAndre Torrey at about 12%. Sweeting got in there a couple times as well, but not really interested in this running back room overall. Geronimo Allison played about 93% of the snaps, Jeff Badet around 80%, and Martavius Bryant around 95% of the snaps. So those are the 3 main guys out there in kind of their 3 wide receiver sets. Badet obviously had the best week. Bryant didn't look too special, from a former NFL guy that has had some success before in the past. His burst just didn't seem to be there. Allison looked okay, but if Brett Hundley gets in, maybe he's a little bit more active at that. And then we saw Matthew Sexton about 26%. Sneak Sweeting at 38%. And then just kind of mix and match at tight end here. Brandon Dillon, the starter, was 31%. Sean Price, the backup, 38%. Travis Kuntz at 12%. And Cam Sutton at 15.5%. So not too much that we can take away from that, but just kind of a baseline to start seeing how often these guys actually were out there on the field. Obviously, this data is up over on my Patreon page as well. It does show, the snap rate share, the target share, everything else like that. So if you guys have any need to look at that, go over to the Patreon page, patreon.com/CoachCraigSports. More than willing to let you guys look at that. It's a small monthly donation, but if you want to take a look at it for free for like a week or something like that, feel free just to message me on Twitter at CoachCraigSport, and we can make that happen as well. But with that being said, going to get out of there, going to go over to my week 2 sheet. We could look at DraftKings. Doesn't really matter to me personally, but I like doing it a little bit more on my sheet. If you guys like seeing a little bit from the draft perspective, feel free to let me know as well. So this is pretty much everybody has their pricing as well. So we're going to start off with the Renegades. So we have the 2 quarterbacks here with Drew Plitt and Kyle Slaughter. Drew Plitt, a lot of people said like, yeah, he really sucked week 1, but the metrics don't really back that up. He wasn't that bad, honestly. He's $8,000. He's a guy you can play in GPPs. If you really think he's going to lose his job to Kyle Slaughter, or they bring him off the bench this week, or we get news that Slaughter is starting for some reason, you could play him in GPPs as well at $7,600. In terms of the running backs, not interesting. Pete Ford at $7,400. He had 1 good run in week 1, didn't look too good overall. Obviously, only played 27% of the snaps. Killens is a non-factor at this point in time. If we see him get used more in the offense in the coming weeks, we can have a different discussion at that point in time. But the main guy here is Davion Smith, $5,700. He is very involved in that running game. He was involved out of the backfield. He played, almost 75% of the snaps. So definitely interested in him. $5,700 price tag is a very good price tag as well. And, the Houston defense, when Orlando was trying to run the ball early, they were able to run the ball pretty successfully. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has a decent week there. So for me, he's going to be a guy you can play in cash. You can play him in GPP as well. Know that he's supposed to be pretty popular again this week. When we talk about these wide receivers, we can exclude Rennell Hall here just because he went on the reserve list earlier today. But for me at wide receiver, I'm not playing Arcanado. I'm not playing Jordan Smallwood. I'm not playing Winningham at this point in time. I'm not playing Monster, who barely played week 1. You can play Tyler Vaughn. He's a GPP pay down option. He's the flat minimum. He led the wide receivers in snaps. He was up there in terms of number 2 in target share as well for week 1. So he's a guy that I do like. Once again, you can use him as a GPP pay down. If you want to use him a cash filler, you can definitely do that as well. And then the other wide receiver, who is technically a tight end, Sal Cannell. He's the only other one I would consider out of this group. $6,500. You can play him in cash. You can play him in GPPs. Obviously, had that large target share in week 1. Going to be super involved in this offense. Once again, obviously played 80% of the snaps week 1 as well. The Renegades defense going against Houston, they're not a team that I really want to take a chance on. So if you really want to play them in GPP, you could do it, but it's not something I'm personally recommending myself. Moving down to DC. We have Jordan Ta'amu at quarterback, $9,700. Not interested whatsoever. This was a very run-heavy team. Derek King was mixing in there as well. Would not be surprised if Jordan Ta'amu ultimately loses this job out to Derek King at some point in time. Derek King mixed in for the run packages, the 3-point conversions, the extra, I should just call it point after conversions, sometimes around the goal line as well. If he's going to be that involved, he could snipe some touchdowns here. If he has a 2-touchdown game and like a 2-point conversion or something like that, he could be in play at $6,700. So if you want to use him as a GPP option, kind of a pay down spot at quarterback, feel free to do so this week. Obviously, if Ta'amu gets benched or Derek King ends up starting, he's going to look even better. Abram Smith went up to $8,500. So he was on the field a lot. He was involved, but he just wasn't too great in week 1. So, and his price tag went up $500. He's not a guy personally I'm playing myself this week, but if you guys want to do it, more power to you. Raquel Armstead at $4,600, a little bit banged up at this point in time with his ankle, but he is listed as probable for this week. So assume that he does play. If you want to mix him in GPPs, you can do so. Not a bad price tag. Get some receiving upside as well. We'll see if they split maybe that backfield a little bit more this week as well. Then in terms of wide receivers, it's really messy here. I'm not touching the Quizazard at $6,300 since he only played 10% of the snaps. Josh Hammond, if you want to go there at $7,400, you can, but it's not enough passing volume for me to want to go there. Chad Hansen, as I mentioned earlier, got released earlier today, so I'm not messing with him. Really, the guys, if you're going for a wide receiver here, you can play Lucky Jackson at $4,600, probably the most involved week 1. Josh Malone, flat 3K pay down if you want to go there. You could do the same thing with Chris Blair as well. I'll throw him up there too. I'm not playing any of these guys in cash. I'm pretty much avoiding these guys, but if you want to really play them, you could. DC Defenders defense, they're a decent defense. They're led by Greg Williams, so they're opportunistic. They're going against Vegas. Luis Perez threw 2 pick sixes in week 1, so $4,300 in GPPs. You can play that. Not anything that I want to play in cash overall, though. And I will say, too, like their run heavy offense kind of slows down the pace. It also burns some more clock, too, so it's not going to make it a high scoring game, most likely. Moving now to Houston, we have Brandon Silver's at $8,600. I assume that he's the top cash quarterback this week overall. $8,600 passing volume, everything you're pretty much looking for. So obviously you can play him in cash and GPP. In terms of running backs, if you want to play Max Borghi in cash, you could. It's not something I'm personally doing myself, but he has that receiving upside. He was kind of limited in terms of snaps last week, but sounds like they rested him down the stretch as well, just because they were winning anyways. So $8,000 if you want to go there, definitely can do that and cash in GPPs. Nick Holley, GPP pay down option for me once again, $3,000 flat minimum. A slot wide receiver that played 60% of snaps. Not bad by any means. He's very familiar with this offense, although he only got 2 targets in week 1. If Travell Harris misses, could offer up some more opportunities for him as well. DeJuan Lee, we're not really going after at $4,200 for a backup running back who saw some extended run in kind of blowout fashion. For the wide receivers, Dante Burnett, $8,500. I think you can play him in cash. I think you can play him in GPP. Pretty safe target share. He played 100% of snaps. Can't really say too much there. Javante Kirkland on the opposite side, he played 100% of snaps. You can definitely play him in GPP. Wouldn't consider him really a cash play, but if Travell Harris ends up missing, maybe you can play him in cash as well. Travell Harris at $5,900. His price tag went down $700. Played a good amount of snaps. Very involved, had some active target share. If they're going to do pretty similar to last week, once again, he's going to look really good. I think he's a cash and a GPP play. Monitor his status with that groin. If we get news today that he's questionable or something like that, may reduce my exposure to him overall. And then at that point in time, if he doesn't end up playing Cedric Byrd at $4,200, could be a GPP option overall in his place. Moving down, I should just put it this way. In terms of all the other wide receivers, besides the guys I just mentioned, your Davion Davis, your Aaron Nelson, your Ben Putnam, Justin Smith, not interested in any of those guys. Garrett Owens, you can group into that bucket until we see him play more, because play 10% of snaps as the tight end week 1. We don't want any part of that. So we're getting down to the Houston Roughnecks defense. They're going against Arlington this week. A relatively young and inexperienced quarterback in Drew Plitt. kind of balanced offense. If you want to play them in GPPs, I definitely think you could do that this week as well. Let's see. We got Jermaine over here. He says, is this for tonight's game? So this is for the 4-game main slate overall. I'm talking through all the teams, all the games in there as well. If we have a little bit of time towards the end, we could take a look at the single game showdown slate for tonight as well. Just kind of depends on how the time gets going here too. Trying to get done, by like about 11:20 my time, which gives me about 25 minutes at this point in time. But so that was kind of Houston in a nutshell. In terms of Orlando, who's the next team up? Paxton Lynch, $8,000. DeAndre Francois, $6,900. Quentin Dormady, $7,900. Not really interested in any of these guys at this point in time, since we really don't know who the quarterback is. We'll see who's inactive first of all this week. So we're not going to know a lot of this information right away unless we hear something, kind of ahead of time, honestly. So not really interested too much there in terms of quarterbacks with Orlando. Jermaine Martin at running back, you can play him in GPPs if you want to, $8,100. I think they'll have a little bit better time establishing the run, at least early on, going to it more often in this game. Probably shouldn't be a pretty high scoring game either way. Calvin Taylor behind him, he's flat 3K. He's a GPP pay down option if you really want to go there. Didn't look too bad in week 1, former Florida Gator, son of Fred Taylor. So there is some pedigree there as well. In terms of their wide receivers, really just interested in Cody Lattimore and Eli Rogers as kind of GPP pay downs. If you want to play Eli Rogers as a cash filler, you can do it as well at $3,100. Some people will be out there playing Charleston Rambo. I will not be one of them this week. Guardians defense, they are a GPP option for me this week going against San Antonio. San Antonio, I'm not too afraid of Jack Cohen, who had true turnovers week 1. Their offensive line really had problems protecting the passer as well. Orlando's defense, yes, they are not the greatest in the world, but going against San Antonio should be a pretty good matchup, and they are the cheapest defense on the slate as well. And also keep in mind, they played against Houston last week, up-tempo, 4 wide receivers on the field pretty much at all times. Orlando Guardians have their best corner on the reserve list, and their second best corner left that game early too as well. So they were pretty depleted in that secondary. Not going to be as much of a problem against San Antonio. Yes, they'll play some 3 wide receiver sets, but they're going to mainly play, kind of those 2 tight end sets as I highlighted before. Let's see. Then we get down to Kalen Bond, $7,100. If we're assuming that he gets the volume that he did last week at $7,100, he's a pretty easy cash game play. You can also play him in GPPs as well. Jacques Patrick behind him, you can play in GPP. He's getting enough volume, and this should be a pretty run-heavy team. So don't have any worries if you go to him. Obviously, if one of them gets a touchdown, they're going to look pretty good as well. Fred Brown is a GPP paydown option, and probably in that slot replacing Landon Akers, $3,200. Definitely can go there. If you really wanted to use him as like a cash game filler, you can do that as well, but not something personally I'm doing myself. Travis Johnson not getting there. Him and TJ Vasher splitting, not really an interest for me personally. Jalen Tolliver at $7,200 in GPPs. If you want to go there, makes a lot of sense. He's the clear number 1 on this team and should maybe get a little bit more volume with no Landon Akers, as long as Jack Cohen is willing to throw the ball, more than 5 yards down the field, which we didn't see a lot of in week 1. And in terms of the tight ends, we have Alize Mack at $3,200. We have Deon Yelder at $2,500. I have Deon Yelder as a paydown option at $2,500. If you want to play him or Mack in a GPP, you could do it, but you're limiting some of your upside there as well, just since it is a tight end position overall. For their Brahmas defense, I call them a cash and GPP play at $4,000. They're going against Orlando, who really doesn't know what the heck they're doing at quarterback at this point in time. Obviously, we've seen 3 turnovers out of the 2 quarterbacks they did play last week, and they had some problems protecting the quarterback as well. So would not be surprised if that happens once again. Moving down to Seattle, we have Ben DiNucci, who, if he's throwing the ball 50 times a game, is a cash and GPP play at $10,200. Not really too worried about the guys behind him. The only thing that really is a worry with him is if he, gets too many turnovers to the point where they kind of are forced to bench him. That would be the only thing to worry about. Morgan Ellison, $4,400. If you really, really wanted to play him in GPP, you could do it, but not something I'm personally doing myself. TJ Hammond's pretty much useless at this point in time for DFS purposes. Brendan Knox, if you want to play him in GPPs, definitely makes a lot of sense. And Don't really have too much else to say on him. Obviously he's a guy that's going to get most of the carries for this team, although they are a pass happy team. So that's the one major concern with him overall. Josh Gordon, I do have listed as a cash and GPP play. He's $10,100. So I get that. Like, yes, he's a lot of money at this point in time. Still has that name value. So a lot of people are probably going to be playing him anyways, but has some pretty good upside in a pass friendly offense. The ownership right now that I've kind of got my eyeballs on, thanks to some different sources and everything, thanks to some different people that I've been talking to, doesn't look like he's going to be too super popular at this point in time. But that name value could have a lot of draw to it as well. Juwan Green, like I said before, if you really want to play him in, like your 150 max and 50 max and 20 max and anything else like that, and just want to squeeze him in a couple lineups, don't blame you for that. Blake Jackson, $6,400 GPP play as long as he's playing, as long as he's kind of starting once again tonight, which we should get some more news on that later today to his thumb injury. Kelvin McKnight, he's $3,000. Really only would consider playing him if Blake Jackson is out tonight, honestly. Ja'Cour Pearson, cash and GPP play. Obviously, he's going to be pretty active in this passing attack once again, $7,300. Not a bad price tag by any means. Then we get down to like the flat 3K guys, Jalen Reed, who missed week 1, not playing him. Jordan Vesey, if you want to take like a GPP pay down option type here, you could do it. Probably not going to play him for cash though, since there is some volatility there. Damon Willis, really didn't see as much that we would want in week 1 to play him in week 2. And then Tempo, we're not even talking about him at this point in time. Getting down to the Battle Hawks, we got AJ McCarron, $10,700. Probably still going to be pretty popular due to name value in week 1 or in week 2, excuse me. And then he did bail himself out in week 1 enough to make his stats look good enough, but without those 2 touchdowns and the last minute and a half of the game, he literally did nothing. So not too concerned about him. I think it's still going to be a more balanced offense, although they did have to throw the ball a little bit more down the stretch. For running backs, Brian Hill's mainly the guy here that I would consider cash and GPP play for me. Obviously, I said he's the starter, monitor his injury status, but it sounds like he'll be in at this point in time. Mateo Durant could mix in a little bit in pass catching situations, but not too worried about that at this point in time with Hill healthy at this point. Marcel Aitman, $9,500 still. I don't know why this guy is so expensive at this point in time. Yes, he played a lot of snaps. Yes, he ran a lot of routes, but he didn't do much. AJ McCarron's not a guy that can push the ball down the field too well, and that's really what Marcel Aitman needs. So we're really limiting out your upside unless you get a long touchdown out of him. Hakeem Butler bailed himself out in week 1 with a touchdown. If you don't get that touchdown in week 2, pretty much going to be worthless. Then George Campbell, I don't know why he's $5,800 at this point in time, so I'm not even going to touch him. Gary Jennings, we're not touching. Stephen Mitchell, inactive week 1 due to injury, not touching as well. Austin Proel, really the only wide receiver that I would play out of this group at $4,400. Decent price tag, played 80% of the snaps, and he was, I believe, their leading target getter from the wide receiver position, and obviously had the big game out of the guys that were there as well. And he fits the skill set of AJ McCarron pretty well as well. Darius Shepard played a lot of snaps. He ran everywhere out in week 1. $6,900 for a guy that doesn't offer a ton of upside. Not somebody I'm super interested in at this point in time. We're not playing any of these tight ends since they all mixed and matched. If you want to play Battlehawks DST versus Seattle, you could do it since Danucci had all those turnovers in week 1, but it's really just a GPP play if you're going to do that. Lastly, we get down to the Vegas Vipers. The quarterback situation you have there, Luis Perez is kind of overpriced at $9,300, especially if he's on thin ice. Probably not going to play him myself personally. If you want to play him or Hundley in GPPs, you can take a shot there. Make your lineups just a little bit different. Running backs, not playing any 3 of these guys. None of them shown enough to warrant any consideration. Torrey would be like the one guy, like if I'm 150 max and I want to throw him in like a lineup or 2 at the flat minimum, maybe you can sneak him in there and do that. But at this point in time, I don't really think you have to do that. And wide receivers, I'm mainly looking at Jeff Petit at GPPs. Obviously, he's the guy that had the big week 1. He stood out. He played a lot of the slot too, which is something that I really wish some teams would do with him in the past. The only concern with him is him just staying healthy. That's really the thing that's limited him in the past before. Allison was out there a ton. He ran like every route for this team as well. Martavis Bryant was out there a ton. Didn't look too good either way. If you want to take some shots on those guys, do not blame me for that whatsoever. Just not personally getting a lot of exposure to this Vegas team myself personally. Matthew Sexton, if you want to use him as a GPP down option at $3,500, he was pretty involved when he was out there. He got open pretty easily, so I would not be surprised if he's doing that once again. Has some return abilities as well. And then Sweeting was kind of involved in the passing game, kind of involved in the running game. If you really want to take a shot on him at $4,500, don't blame you there. Tight ends, we're not touching this group. All of them are playing, all of them pretty much blockers at this point in time. Then for the Vipers defense, they are $3,300. Play them in GPP. They're going against DC. Should be a lower scoring game in general. So I'm not too worried about them if you want to play them. They look decent on defense as well. So would not have any concerns about them. Decent week to pay down at defense, whether you're paying down for Seattle, which I don't think I talked about their defense too much going against St. Louis. A couple of banged up linemen, but it sounds like they should play this week. You could play them as kind of a cash or GPP play as well. But kind of the pay down options I like mainly this week with Seattle, with Vegas, with Orlando even, and with San Antonio. Those would be the 4 defenses I'm particularly targeting in week 2. But that's kind of what I have at this point in time. We can go over to DraftKings, kind of do a try to build like a cash lineup real quick. Maybe we'll build like a GPP lineup real quick as well. And then if anybody does have any additional questions from there, we can open it up. I know Jermaine did ask about if it was for tonight's game. We can take a look at tonight's game as well. Maybe build a lineup for that as well. And before I get too into it as well, if you are out there, if you're playing XFL DFS, obviously, if you're watching this, if you're not using an optimizer or anything else like that to help with projections and everything else like that, the one that I personally use myself is called Run the Sims, runthesims.com over there. It's a monthly membership. I think it's like $49.99 a month or something like that, or $45.99 a month. Don't quote me on that, but their optimizer, one of the best in the business. You can do a classic optimizer. You can do a do-it-yourself optimizer where you go in, you tinker with some of the rates and everything else like that, which is something that I do personally myself. I can bring this up on the screen as well so that you guys can see just a little bit more with that as well. But with helps if I type right. So with runthesims.com, if you haven't used the site before, if you're interested in signing up, checking it out, seeing everything like that, if you use the promo code coach, which is I'll leave here in the chat as well, which is just coach, all capital letters, you'll get 10% off when you do that. It helps them out, helps me out just a little bit as well. And obviously you get one of the better tools in the business for XFL DFS. And if you've been out there, if you're going around, there isn't a lot of XFL tools and projections and everything else out there at this point in time. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. We'll bring up Run the Sims real quick. Let me get logged back in first real quick before I bring that up. Apparently I was not logged in anymore. So we're getting this logged in now. So I'm just going to walk through real quick, show some of the things that we can do. So I'm bringing this up real quick here. We're just popping up on the screen. So if you go up to the top, you go to DFS tools, you go to spring football. This is the classic optimizer. So essentially what you'll see here, let me hit accept there real quick. So you'll see like you can sort by quarterback, running back, wide receiver, defense. So you can find any player you want. For NFL, they do the ownership. For XFL, they really haven't been doing the ownership here. It'll tell you like the base projection for each player, the points per dollar, the optimal appearance rates, how often they're coming up, the boom rate, the chances that they have, the big game, essentially the bust rate, the chances that they have, whatever the percentage is for them to have that bust game, and then just kind of going from there. But these are some there. You can go over to the other tool here, which is something that I do personally myself, the DIY simulators for the spring football. So this is where you can go in for each team, kind of put in your own kind of type of projections. So we use St. Louis as an example. We'll say right now I have them listed as like 17 points scored, the pace of the game. So we have them running 51 plays at this point in time. If you wanted to change any of this stuff, you just go in here. If we would say, hey, we think they're going to score 20 points, then we put 20 points in. If we think they're going to run 49 plays, we can put 49 plays here. And then this is the rush rate. So if you think they're going to run the ball 44% of the time instead of 46, you can change that. How often they're going to run the ball in for a touchdown as opposed to pass the ball in for a touchdown. Sack rate in terms for the defense. So we can do a lot there. We can go down here. So this is like the rushing carry market share. There's a lot that you can do with this. Run the Sims does have their kind of ones in at this point in time. These are kind of mine that I have in at this point in time as well. So how often the guy's going to run the ball in terms of the total market share for the team. You can do the same thing for receiving. Their total market share, the likelihood that they're going to score on any given rushing touchdown, target share, the market share that they're going to score on any single receiving touchdown. And obviously, this is going to change throughout the weeks, but this is just something that I put in myself. And then once we're done with the DIY part, you can input for every team. Obviously, we can go over to Run the Sims, and then it'll pop up. Let me hit Run the Sims first. So it'll pop up with the projections based on the inputs that you did give. So you'll see here kind of the optimal results. So most of the time, these are like the most optimal players that are popping up at this point in time. So Ben DiNucci, Davion Smith, Max Borghi, Jakir Pearson, Brandon Silvers, Travell Harris. And then if you go over here, this was my projections. That's kind of based on what we did put in. Obviously, these are going to change a little bit just since I did mess around with St. Louis a little bit there, but this is kind of what I already had. If you guys are kind of interested in my general projections, we can go through there as well. Can put them on the Patreon page as well. So that's kind of what we got with Run the Sims at this point in time. They also do have a for prize picks tool for spring football as well. Let me see if that's up and working at this point in time. I know last week when I was kind of messing around with it, didn't really do too much. So these are showing some of the popular ones at this point in time. So Josh Gordon, the favorite or receiving yards, 55.5. The favorite is the under. The favorite win percentage is 20. So this is telling you which side is being like bet the most. More times that result actually does come about, so the favorite. So in terms of Josh Gordon, Ben, the under on 55.5 receiving yards is winning about, 73% of the time in the projection model. Ben DiNucci under 1.5 passing touchdown is winning 61% of the model. And this just shows pretty much for tonight's game at this point in time. So these are the ones that are popping up. So it is a useful tool that you can use as well if you're on Prize Picks and building some lineups from there or building some prop plays from there as well. Obviously, we can talk a little bit more about Prize Picks at some other point in time. Might post some Prize Pick XFL stuff on my Twitter at CoachCraigSport as well. But this is kind of Run the Sims in a nutshell without going too in depth. But once again, if you are interested in it, go over to runthesims.com, use promo code coach, and it'll get you 10% off when you do that. It helps them out a little bit, helps me out a little bit, and we'll help you out a little bit for DFS as well. So we're going to get out of Run the Sims for now. We'll go over DraftKings. We'll build a cash lineup real quick, and then we'll build a GPP lineup real quick. I think we're running out of a little bit of time here probably to do the single game slate at this point in time, but if you guys do have any other additional questions, feel free to leave them in the live chat if you're watching live or on the comments if you're watching on replay. So let me get DraftKings brought up here real quick once again. So I need to go over to XFL. And I want to enter a new lineup. I don't want to enter one of the 10 that I already have in there. So we're going to create a new lineup real quick. And the first one we'll do is the cash game lineup. So personally myself, obviously we're waiting for this to load as I'm talking here, but at quarterback, when it comes to a cash lineup this week, if I'm playing it in cash, haven't decided if I'm playing cash this week or not yet. Last week's cash game lineup was decent, but it could have been better at the same time too. It was just a little bit off. Probably should have had some Sal Cannella in there as well, instead of like Jalen Tolliver that I did end up playing, who I did like quite a bit as well. But for this week at quarterback, going with Brandon Silvers in terms of cash lineup. If you want to play like a Ben DiNucci here, you could do that as well. But for me personally, Brandon Silvers is the guy that I'm going with. He's a little bit cheaper, offers a little bit more there in terms of price range flexibility. When we go to running back, we got a couple different options this week. If you really want to play Max Borghi, you could do it at $8,000. You could play Davion Smith at $5,700. Definitely like him as well. Kalen Balaj is there and Brian Hill's there. Kalen Balaj is $7,100. Brian Hill is $7,300. I think all four are probably the most viable for cash this week. Just kind of depends on what else you're playing in your cash build. At this point in time when we are building this, we're going to throw Kalen Balaj in here just because he had the most opportunities in week 1, and that could continue again in week 2. So we're just going to put him there for now. we can mix around with that a little bit more as we get moving. So probably the next guy that is going to go in here is probably going to be Ja'Cory Pearson for Seattle, since $7,300, pretty reasonable price tag there as well. So don't really have too many concerns there. Obviously, he was pretty involved, had the leading target share for that Seattle team, which is another team that's going to throw the ball a ton. Obviously, we have Brandon Silvers here. Be nice to stack in cash game. You don't necessarily have to do it, but it makes a lot of sense as well. I'm going to go with Burnett. Um, since he's $8,500, stack him with Brandon Silver for the cash game play. If you want to play Kirkland instead, you could do that in cash, but he's more of a GPP for me. Travell Harris, I like him in cash, but we have to wait and see his injury status as well. So kind of what we have left now, we have two flex spots, a DST, $18,500 remaining. So a good amount of money there. We're going to go over to DST first. I think, you could look at the Dragons tonight for $3,500, getting some pressure on AJ McCarron, maybe doing something that way. Or you can look at San Antonio going against Orlando. We're just going to throw San Antonio at this point in time. Now, kind of from here, when we're talking cash game, what do you want to do? You have $14,500 remaining. If you really want to play like a Josh Gordon, you could do that. But obviously, that limits kind of your upside. If you're doing it that way, you're probably going to play like a Ben DiNucci in that quarterback spot. I probably would play like a Davion Smith in your running back spot, save a little bit of money there as well, and then kind of fill out your last spot from there. But if we're not playing Josh Gordon here, let's just say we're playing somebody else. The cash game build, it's going to get a little bit interesting here because you have some options too as well. I think Sal Cannell is definitely another one that we can consider. So we'll throw him in there at $6,500. We got $8,000 left over. So if you want to play like a Max Borghi there, you could do it. If you wanted to play like Brian Hill, you can do that as well. So there's a little bit different options for cash, but I think for the main part for cash, you're either playing Brandon Silvers or Ben DiNucci at quarterback. You're playing one of those running backs that I did list off with Davion Smith, Kalen Balazs, Brian Hill, Max Borghi, if you want to play him as well. And then I think at wide receiver, you're mainly looking like a Ja'Cory Pearson, Dante Burnett, Sal Cannell is out there as well. Defense-wise, probably looking at San Antonio, probably looking at Seattle. You could play Orlando as well since they are the cheapest one at $3,100. I think they got some pressure rate that they could go after Jack Cohn if he plays as well. However, if Jack Cohn doesn't play and his reads in it, maybe lay off the Orlando just a little bit. But that's my personal opinion on that one. So that's kind of where I'm at for cash at this point in time. Probably not playing cash personally myself this week. When we're talking about GPPs, mainly at quarterback, myself personally, getting Ben DiNucci. We're getting Brandon Silvers once again. And then I'll mix in like a little bit of Drew Plitt. I don't think he was as bad as everybody wants them to put. And personally, myself, I'm getting some Derek King in there too as well. I'm probably playing 20 max this week. I'll probably play one or two lineups that have Derek King in there. I'll probably play 3 lineups that have Drew Plitt, and then I'm just going to split the rest down the middle with like Ben DiNucci and Brandon Silvers. I think that's 15 left. Probably have to make it an even number there at some point in time, but that's kind of my plan of attacking the quarterback position this week overall. When we go down to running back, personally, I'm going to have some Jermaine Martin. I'll tell you that right now. I think the opportunity is going to be there once again in GPPs. And going to have some Max Borghi once again. We'll have some Brian Hill. We'll have some Kalen Balazs. We'll have some Brendan Knox just a little bit in there as well. Probably about in line with what the field's going to be at this point in time. Let's see who else is in here that running back that I'm going to mix in. Davion Smith, I'll have a good handful as well. I know he's at $5,700. Overlooked him. I'll have a little bit of Jack Patrick as well, just to get a little bit different off that Kalen Balazs, because I think those guys, they'll probably get a little bit closer to splitting the backfield, even though snaps were about split last week, but the carries were more lean towards the Balazs side. Let's see who else could mix in here as well. I think that's mainly it. I'll get a little bit of Nick Holly as well in some of my Brandon Silvers lineups. I don't even consider him a running back at this point in time because he's been playing slot wide receiver. He played slot wide receiver the last time in the XFL too. And for the people that don't know, Nick Holly in college, if I remember correctly, he played a little bit of quarterback, a little bit of running back, and a little bit of wide receiver. So he played all 3 positions. I believe that was at Miami, Ohio, if I'm correct. It's been a while since I looked at Nick Holly. So let me just look that up real quick. Kent State, excuse me. So, um, got those MAC schools a little bit mixed up there, but Kent State did play a little bit quarterback, did play a little bit of running back, did play a little bit of wide receiver in his time there. So there was an ACL injury at some point in there too, one of the position switches too. So I remember that. It's been a little while since that. Obviously, it's been about 3 years since went through all that part, but play a little bit in the CFL, play a little bit of running back, play a little bit of wide receiver up there as well. But that's kind of where we're at in terms of the running back position. Moving over to wide receivers real quick. Josh Gordon going to have a good amount again, once again this week. Heavy passing offense. Probably going to be over the field. Just kind of depends on where the field ends up being. If the ownership projection is accurate, he's right around that 20%. Still going to be a little bit over the field. But if it's more in line with people being the popular name, once again, could be in there. But personally, myself, getting Josh Gordon. I'll get some Jeff Badette once again. Burnett's going to be another popular one for me. He's just mixing in a lot of lineups overall, whether I'm playing Brandon Silvers or not, honestly. Let's see who else is here. Ja'Cory Pearson's one that I have quite a bit of as well. Jalen Tolliver is a guy that I'm going back to once again this week, $7,200. The main guy on his offense, if Reed Sinet's announced that he's starting, I'll probably get to even more Tolliver this week, honestly. Kirkland getting a fair amount of. Sal Cannell get a fair amount of as well. Blake Jackson, I'm going to be under the field. I just don't think there's anything special about that guy, honestly. In Seattle, the way they're rotating wide receivers, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets knocked down a peg, plus the injury as well. Let's see who else is here. Travell Harris, as long as he's playing, I will be over the field on him. That's pretty much a guarantee at this point in time. Let's see who else here. Jawan Green will mix a little bit in, obviously 20 max, and so probably get him in one or two lineups just because sometimes you're drawn to those players, and even if it didn't work out one week, you gotta go back to them a couple of weeks as well, especially when you're playing more than one lineup, more than three lineups, more than five lineups. It definitely makes sense to get a little bit of exposure to some of the guys you feel pretty good about as well. Austin Proel, I'll get a good amount of exposure to once again tonight. If you're playing that single game slate, definitely would recommend to him once again. Cedric Bird, if Travell Harris doesn't play, I'll get a little bit of him as well. Let's see. Cody Lattimore will be getting a decent amount of it as well at $3,700. Obviously, it'll be very interesting to see what the ownership comes in at him, because he's one of those guys that it's not projected for a lot, but it would make sense if he comes in. I'll get a little bit of Fred Brown, kind of the different pay down option at this point in time. Get a decent amount of Eli Rogers. Once again, seems like he's going to be involved kind of no matter who the quarterback is at that slot position for Orlando. So he might be the safest wide receiver on that team overall. Let's see. Anybody else down here that we're really getting to at the bottom? Maybe a Josh Malone, maybe a Chris Blair share here and there in 20 maxes. But if you're playing like 150 max, I think it makes some sense to get to those guys. Tyler Vaughns, I will have some shares of, especially in the lineups that I am playing Drew Plitt in. Maybe I'll sneak one Kyle Slaughter lineup in there, but we'll see. I'm not too convinced on it at this point in time. I think Plitt didn't look as bad as everybody's trying to make him out to be. These tight ends down here at the bottom, really the only one that I would consider would be Deion Yelder, and that's just kind of in a 20 max. I might have him in like one or two lineups once again. That's kind of where I'm at. We'll try to build a GPP lineup here real quickly. So I'm going to do Brandon Silvers just because it gives us a little bit more money than playing with like a Ben DiNucci. And I think Silvers is almost a little bit safer too. DiNucci may be a little bit more turnover prone, even though Silvers had 2 week one, DiNucci had 3, even though you could argue at least one of them wasn't his fault. For when we're talking about this being more of a GPP lineup, then maybe I'm not playing these chalky running backs. So we'll just put Nick Holly in this one at this point in time. Get some exposure to a running back that's really a wide receiver at this point in time. So this could end up being a build that doesn't really play any traditional running backs. So I think in this one, we're going to consider that Bell Harris isn't playing. That would make Nick Holly look a little bit better as well. But we got Brandon Silvers, we got Nick Holly and Burnett alongside with him. I don't mind that double stack whatsoever. I don't mind going across the board on this game, putting Sal Cannella in there as well. Still probably going to want to get a Seattle pass catcher. I think we're going to go Josh Gordon in this case. We should have enough money left. Since this is a GPP lineup, I'm playing Orlando Guardians DST. I think they can get after Jack Cohen. And then at that point in time, we have, $10,200 left over. You could still play anybody you want at that point in time. So that is an interesting GPP lineup. Whether or not you want to play like a Jeff Badette here, we'll just put him in there as the placeholder for now. Definitely can go with something like this in GPPs. Obviously, if you're playing like a Benvenucci lineup, the GPP might look a little bit different. We'll play him. We'll play Josh Gordon alongside him. Uh, Blake Jackson and Pearson, kind of the chalky wide receiver. So maybe if you want to get another part of that Seattle passing game that's just a little bit different, you could do that. If you want to play like a Brendan Knox in there too as well, you could do something like that. Just be a little bit different in GPPs. Let's do it with just throw a VC in here. Nah, I don't really want to play VC. I'm gonna put Fred Brown in this lineup too. Just be a little bit different. Running back, we're going to play, I think, Max Borgi in this lineup too as well. I wouldn't mind Jermaine Martin in this line too as well. I think this is a lineup I would like to get like an Austin Proel as well, but it's kind of weird without the second pass catcher stack of Ben DiNucci too. Obviously, there's only 4 games. You don't have to double stack and run back and everything else like that, which is a little bit more popular in NFL. Don't think you have to do that at this point in time, but getting a little bit of game stacks in there too is always fun in theory too. So we're just going to do Brahma's defense at this point in time. You got $10,100. You could still pretty much pay for anybody at this point in time. So whoever you want to fit in there as well could be a lineup. These are just kind of thrown together ones off the top of my head. Obviously, going over to run the Sims, you can run up to 150 different lineups at one point in time. If you're using the DIY thing, pretty simple there. You run the Sims, you get your own projections. If you want to go there, you can save those projections as save the CSV, go over to the regular optimizer, and then from there, you're able to upload as well. That's something that I do quite a bit. Obviously, as I mentioned before, if anybody would like to see my projections, feel free to let me know. I can let you see them, or I can bring them up on Patreon at patreon.com/CoachCraigSport once again. But that's pretty much what I have for XFL DFS for week 2. If anybody does have any additional questions, feel free to let me know, whether it's live right now in the chat or in the comments post video, or reaching out to me even on Twitter at CoachCraigSport. Definitely would feel free to talk about XFL at any point in time. But that's kind of where we're at for week 2. Hopefully everybody has a good week 2. Hopefully some of the things we saw in week 1 help us in week 2 as well. But once again, runthesims.com, use promo code coach at when you first sign up, I believe it is, and or it'll be when you're making your payment, one or the other, and you'll get 10% off there. Helps them out a little bit, helps me out a little bit as well. Obviously, a great site, especially if you're somebody that is a little bit more data driven and looking at target shares and like to adjust things as much as I do as well. But once again, if you are already excuse me, I can't talk right now. But once again, if you are someone that is brand new to my channel, checking out for the first time, feel free to subscribe. Definitely would appreciate it. Helps to build the community that we're building here at Coach Craig Sports. Obviously, a lot of DFS talk, XFL DFS going on right now. NBA DFS is kicking back off today as well. So I will be doing a live stream for that this afternoon as well, probably around 2 o'clock Central Time. So definitely be on the lookout for that if you're playing multiple DFS sports. And then obviously look out for some price pick content over on Twitter at Coach Craig Sport. Look out for some for XFL. Look out for some for NBA as well. And then just as we move along, we'll be doing a lot of different content for a lot of different DFS sports as well. As we get closer to the NFL draft, probably be doing some NFL draft content as well. So definitely be sure to check out everything that is going on over on the channel. And if you are a newer current subscriber who's yet to do so, also make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss out on any of that content that is coming out. But once again, do appreciate everybody that did take the time out of their day to tune in today, whether you're watching live or on replay. Definitely appreciate you guys checking it out, and definitely hope that each and every one of you has a great rest of your day.